Let's Hang Out on Air's live. Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman, no Cecil Lammy, as he is celebrating birthday. Happy birthday, Katarina Lammy.
Happy birthday.
Yes. And of course, Gene Bramall is busy in the salt mines on all of our behalf. So this will be a preview. Actually, the couch has been on just a short hiatus as we've been churning out some draft review episodes, and there will be a couch episode about the rookies, the landing spots, the post-draft RSP. Make sure you get your RSP, and we'll talk about what we think about these landing spots and all the different possibilities they represent. Before we jump into what we're going to talk about tonight, first we have to talk about, and I say have to, Matt. We have to talk about Josh Gordon as we see that he was not reinstated. He applied for reinstatement. He was not reinstated. Now there is some dots that we cannot necessarily connect here. There was a report that, and by the way, Football Guys open for business, new team reports, all kinds of new features, rankings, early bird special through May 31st. All right. If you are watching this live, if you are listening to the podcast afterwards, if you're part of our community, you need to be an Insider Pro. And this is the best time to do it through May 31st. You're going to get a discount. And the paywall is going to go up through July 15th. So if you're not an Insider Pro and you want to see what we do through that time, you can, but you can. The only time you can lock in the early bird discount is through May 31st. So got to mention that. But Matt, Josh Gordon, and again, it's we really say this often. Only 26 years old. He hasn't really done anything significant since 2014. Mike Garofalo from NFL.com says the team would welcome Josh Gordon back if he somehow gets his life together. And I like to think people can change. I know you like to think people can change. We've been round and round on this so many times. I know we had a Twitter conversation about this today, but just unload, weigh in, because as you said, when we had our Twitter conversation, there were reports that he was in better shape than he was at his peak. There were reports that he was doing everything the league wanted him to do, but he was turned down for reinstatement. And whatever we decide fills in that blank, it ain't good.
No, it was funny because I was just updating my rankings for Football Guys this week and putting in comments. And yesterday I had put Josh Gordon inordinately high, expecting that he would come back. And, pun intended there. And when we look at Josh, at the situation, what I was writing up is the reports that I had read on the internet, which was, his agent claimed he was in his best shape since 2013, which was his best season. And then when you add into the fact that he was also he was working out with a trainer every day. He was following the NFL's protocol to the letter, according to the agent, and that, whatever the NFL laid out, he was doing. So it seemed very optimistic that some things were going to go well there. But at the same time, maybe we got a little bit of some foreshadowing from Hugh Jackson, because when he was asked during the combine, and I think before the draft, his thought was, I'm not really going to talk about Josh Gordon other than we'll wait for that bridge and, to cross and when it's time. And there's really nothing else there to say about him or whether he's someone that even has a place on this team. I'm not even going to talk about that. So, some reporters have said that they've closed the book on him because of that. Others said it's open. It's been open to interpretation. But then today, as we were discussing this, we had a follower chime in and say that 2 days ago, the agent basically cut ties with Josh Gordon. So something had to happen that caused Gordon for the agent to do that. And if your agent is going to cut ties with you after the guy's been living in your house, something had to go down that was pretty much a, irrevocable situation, for the agent to feel like that he couldn't represent him anymore. So it's interesting because if it were just, this is speculation on my part, but if it were just marijuana, this whole thing should be something that would be kind of in an uproar. People would be more in an uproar about, I think, because I think we all know that there are a lot of players that do marijuana. The problem is, or what happens is that they know how to mask it probably well enough in the league and know how to time what they time in terms of testing. So the fact that he doesn't seem to know how to do that well would be an issue. But it seems like there's more to it than that, because even if it were just marijuana, then you're looking at, he should know that if he wants to have a career, that he needs to fix this, and that means staying off of it. It means knowing how to manage his life in a way where that he can overcome the types of perceptions that he's had. And there's more to it than just that. And we're seeing that becoming a little bit clearer and clearer just by the actions of others and how they're dealing with it. So, it's interesting, because I think about a dynasty trade I made a few years ago to get him, and I should have thought about it a little bit more in hindsight, because the guy I made a trade with was a former Brown scout. So you would think that Matt Williamson would have some people that he knows with the Browns organization that probably have told him exactly what's happening, if he has any connections with those people at all, and explain to the depths of what his situation is. But I was one to be optimistic and hope for the best, and think also, why not? I'll take the patience play with somebody like that for what I got for it. But looking at it from this standpoint, I think fantasy wise, you you probably want to wait maybe another month or two or three just to see if there's any more information that comes out about what's happened. But I would be prepared to hit the eject button on him and just deal with it.
Yeah, just to move on. And it's tough because when we see the talent he's demonstrated, we know that doesn't evaporate. He's still young enough that he's on the upslope of his career physically. And we've had, not just in football, in life, in sports, more unlikely redemption stories. There have been more unlikely redemption stories than Josh Gordon returns to the field in 2018 and picks up. And look, even if it's just now we're down to less than 1% chance that he can get back to Josh Gordon, that still calculates somewhere in the equation when you're looking at, well, do I pick up Josh Gordon or do I open up a roster spot so I can add Corey Clement or something like that? I mean,
take Josh Gordon.
exactly, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's still another side of the equation, and I would guess that I'm the type, because I'm the type that I am, that if people do start dropping Josh Gordon, that I will probably pick him up and see what happens. And I mean, just in a startup, a 16-team startup, I took him in the 14th round because I went light on wide receiver early. And I thought 14th round, 16 teams, IDP. Anyway, maybe that's the thing, is I still can't admit that I made a mistake. But let's talk about maybe some ways that we can make other moves to offset some of these mistakes. And what I want to talk about, since we will spend time on the couch, probably one of those episodes that goes an hour and a half or 2 hours or something, talking about the rookies. Let's talk about some of the places where rookies didn't land. And in fact, let's talk about Cleveland and the wide receivers, because Cleveland didn't address the wide receiver position. You're looking at Kenny Britt. You're looking at Corey Coleman with potentially Deshaun Kaiser. So a rookie does figure in here when we think about the short and long-term view here. We've ribbed Corey Coleman a bit about the idea of the cold. Kenny Britt with a heroic Purple Heart season in the Rams offense last year. What does he look like in this offense? We know Hugh Jackson, whatever there is to work with in an offense, Hugh Jackson's going to get as much as he can out of that. So Kenny Britt is really still being overlooked. Corey Coleman, because of the promise of the future, isn't. And of course, we have David Njoku as a rookie kind of figuring this picture. But the Browns wide receivers, they threw those darts last year. Jordan Payton, Rashard Higgins, Rick Lewis. What do we think about the Browns wide receivers post Gordon?
The thing is when you look at this offensive system, it's a West Coast offense. So you're looking at guys who should be precise route runners to fit with that type of system. And Kenny Britt obviously was jettisoned, or, they were fine with him leaving, which tells you one of two things. Either the system was just really basic in LA, and they just let him be kind of an intermediate and deep route guy, and the intermediate routes weren't particularly special. But the same thing goes is that he's been a Jeff Fisher guy all along. And if that's the case with the Jeff Fisher offenses or regimes offenses, then how much better is he going to be here? And then on top of it, if he, Kaiser is obviously going to be the guy long term, but maybe short term, it still may be Cody Kessler, who is more of a short and intermediate thrower than he is a deep ball guy. So if that happens, I don't see the fit as being as all that strong. And I look at Britt, and you certainly like the athletic potential there, and I still think that he can give you Rams-like numbers, at least maybe not as good as last year, but what he's done previously up until that point, which just gives you kind of a bye week option who might be a little overpriced now because people thinking of it that he's the primary guy. But I think Corey Coleman gives you more as a route runner in terms of potential with his quickness, his ability to drop his weight, and then also that double move ability that's going to be super strong in his game that can help with a play action game. So I like a lot of that. What gives me hope more than anything, though, is that regardless of those two guys and what they may be able to give you in terms of a full route tree, I think that both Kaiser and Kessler are a huge upgrade to Robert Griffin in terms of throwing in the middle of the field where Griffin would not dare go. It was just crazy how much he lost his confidence or ability to see the middle of the field in this offense. So I like those. I like Coleman a little bit more in terms of long-term upside. Short-term, I mean, obviously Britt is going to give you probably more of the primary targets to begin with, unless Coleman just starts to show up just really prominently during the offseason. I'm still fascinated with Jordan Payton. Jared Payton. I'm still fascinated with him too. But Jordan Payton, I'm still fascinated with, even though he had a PED suspension. I think that even in the briefest moments that I saw him get some time, I kind of liked what I saw out of him. I still think that he's a good route runner who could get better. He's a tough physical guy, but he's probably fourth or fifth on the list right now. You still have Ricardo Lewis, and Ricardo Lewis showed a little bit more as an athlete. They like getting him on the field right away. If he can continue to grow, he also has that toughness to be able to make plays in tight contact and adjust to the ball, and he's got that run after the catch ability that's a little stronger. Higgins, I know a lot of people liked Higgins, but I'm just thinking that he may not quite be the athlete enough to be a starter. And that what that does is just put him as a career reserve at best. He might develop into a weakened version of Harry Douglas. So this is an offense that I think they're just looking at, look, we need to get better at quarterback first. We need to make sure that our defense can make more stops, and maybe we can be in games in the second half and we can run the ball a little bit more. And if we do that, then again, they didn't draft anybody but Matthew Days. And Matthew Days is a competent player who can run between the tackles. He's a good blocker and a good receiver. He could have an 8 to 10 year career as a reserve. He might compete with Duke Johnson. He might, if he surprises a little bit more from the athletic end. But neither of those guys are competing with Isaiah Crowell, who's healthy, which tells you that Hugh Jackson was good to his word, that he sees Isaiah Crowell as a feature back. And he probably also sees the situation as, look, it wasn't Crowell's fault that he was inconsistent. It was the fact that we couldn't hold a lead in the first half or stay close enough to run the ball. So why are we going to try and fix that when we need to fix so many other things?
Yeah, I was going to say the running game. I mean, with them locking up Joel Bitonio, signing J.C. Treader, signing Kevin Zeitler, if they can just stay in games, if the defense can settle down a little bit and they can stay in games, then the running game becomes maybe the one place where there's a chance for some fantasy profit here. Because even Terrell Pryor, with all the targets he got last year, what was he good for? About 1,000 and somewhat minimal amount of touchdowns. And we want Deshaun Kaiser to not play this year. Of course,
No.
We'll see how that goes. And you know what Cody Kessler can do. We know what Brock Osweiler did. It's going to be fascinating to see what pieces fall into place here. But even if Corey Coleman doesn't turn that corner, we'll see about Kenny Britt. Maybe the answer is in another year or two, the name that this offense passing offense will gel around. But they need that quarterback, and they need the team to settle down. The pieces are there. I want to stay in the AFC North and look at Baltimore, because whether it was running back or wide receiver, I think it was very credible, the idea that they would have invested in either of these positions in the draft, and they didn't. We've got Kenneth Dixon suspended for 4 games. We've got Terrence West, who will go into the season basically as a starter. We've got Danny Woodhead, who's recovering from ACL surgery, but obviously in a very cold free agent market, they made a priority of getting Woodhead. And then on the wide receiver side, we had Mike Wallace was one of the quietest 1,000-yard seasons. They picked up his option. Brashad Perryman, who made some plays last year that showed why they took him in the first round. Maybe not consistently, maybe didn't up his snap count, but at least got through the season healthy. And then some interesting guys behind them. But what makes them interesting is they're going to fight it out. Chris Moore, more of a deep ball specialist. Michael Campanaro. And look, I'm not trying to make the easy comparisons, but I mean, he is in that slot run after catch mold. You still have Chris Matthews, Super Bowl hero, and another long receiver who can make plays downfield. And I guess I am going to kind of cheat and talk about rookies here and say there is one rookie that I'm very interested in if he can stay healthy. Tim Patrick, an undrafted rookie out of Utah who physically has everything you want. Put it together against cornerbacks that went in this draft very high. And I say this against the background, Matt, of Baltimore was an offense last year that game to game, because as many as 7 or 8 or 9 players could touch the ball, was a nightmare for fantasy. So maybe is that the right answer? Do we just punt the Baltimore offense again?
Yeah, I think it's a waiver wire show for the Baltimore offense at this stage. Is like, who's getting a chance, who looks healthy, who's playing well, and let's roll with them. Or it's late, so basically you're making late round stabs and waiver wire picks after that, because really, let's start with these running backs. I mean, obviously, I think we saw Dixon show enough that he was making a bid for the starting job late in the summer. Then he got hurt, and West continued to play better, well enough that he was the guy until later in the season. And then Dixon started to flash again. Well, Danny Woodhead complicates all of this. So the overpriced guy is probably going to be Dixon. Well, not really, because he's got that suspension. So it's really going to be West, who's going to be slightly overpriced. The guy you might want to take later is Dixon, but then Woodhead could mix that up, because as good as Dixon is as a receiver, Woodhead is among the best in the game, and Woodhead's a good red zone presence on top of that. So that really kind of, like, if he's back to form, and he should be enough to be at least in the passing game, that screws things up. And then these receivers, Moore might threaten a little bit more. I really liked what Perriman showed, but then you heard in the offseason again from Harbaugh that we really need to see Perriman ramp up his route running. And that has always been his issue heading in, is making sure that he flattens breaks, that he's able to make catches that are in time with where the throw should be, so that he can run after the catch. And that's why his speed was surprising, because on film, people would watch him and he'd often get tackled after he made the play. It was because he didn't make the right depth of route. And so he couldn't run after the catch in situations where he should. And that's something I know that Gene Clemens and I looked at in the RSP film room, and Gene pointed out unbelievably well. But beyond, he and Wallace, Campanaro can't stay healthy. I really loved him out of school, but he can't stay healthy. Then you got Abadejo, who is out of Mississippi, Ole Miss, who's fast, but the missile, yeah, he's a Quadri Ismail kind of like rerun, in terms of fast, goes in a straight line well, but he's got to develop more. Tim White's a UDFA, but I saw him, he looked strictly like a special teamer. I like what you mentioned about Tim Patrick. He's kind of a big overachiever who actually showed more in speed. in his workouts than what it may have looked like on some of the film. So you see a guy who's combative to the ball, who's got good height and strength. So that's positive. There's one other guy that I'm going to mention who's a personal favorite of mine, who's been sitting on the practice squad since the middle of the year after he completely screwed up his opportunity in Tampa Bay last year by fumbling the ball away. It's just one Kenny Bell. Kenny
Oh
Bell's
yeah,
sitting on the practice squad. So I'm hoping that Kenny Bell can show up, not fumble the ball on kick returns, catch the passes that he should catch. Because the first couple of weeks of training camp, he looked fantastic. They were raving about him. And then he showed up in the preseason games and completely ruined his chances. And they were like, forget you. We've invested too much in for you to do this. So I'm hoping that, whatever the reason was with all of that, that maybe he's ready and maybe we'll get to see some of that talent manifest, because it's a wide open situation here. I mean, if he's good enough, who's to say he doesn't compete with Chris Moore for the number 3
no,
opportunity there? So it is wide
it
open.
is.
None of these guys are top drawer guys. Again, it's a waiver wire deal. And outside of Mike Wallace, if you really are like, I don't even, again, outside of him, it's kind of like wait till later, or just look at the waiver wire and learn more about these guys until things start to happen.
And even Wallace is more of your bench depth than somebody you want
Yeah.
to be plugging in every week. And Keenan Reynolds is still there, the Swiss Army knife. It just make sense, by the way. And what's funny is, as I mention these situations, maybe being drawn to these situations to talk about them because they weren't addressed by draft picks means that they'll be addressed by the post May 9th. And it's so funny. But just as a real quick aside, what did you think when you saw the LeGarrette Blount May 9th tender that Bill Belichick, the Patriots, did, where nobody even saw this? People that are salary cap nerds and rulebook nerds didn't understand this until after the Patriots did it, which apparently is, if you make an offer to one of your free agents and then they don't sign through, I guess it's about 2 months after free agency starts, then you offer them, I think, 110%. I might get some of the details wrong here, of what they made the previous year. Then the picks will, because this is the threshold, 2 months or so, when free agents no longer count towards the compensatory pick formula. But that reinstates that. And then if they don't sign by like mid-July, they can only negotiate with that team. So LeGarrette Blount basically has to sign before training camp ish, or the Patriots own him through like week 10. And that's going to transition to this, but it just makes sense that some of these situations might be addressed by free agents instead of draft picks. And doesn't it just make sense that Anquan Bolden would go back to the Ravens for this
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah, it
I
would
mean,
make total sense for that, and then when you talk about the Swiss Army knife, from Navy, Keenan Reynolds, you have a guy by the name of Taekwon Mizell out of UVA who might compete for that role, and we might see Keenan Reynolds decide that maybe a military career is probably a better thing to
right.
do. But this whole thing with Belichick, I mean, again, this is someone who's on top of their situation, and the Patriots, I mean, they signed a lot of running backs, but did they really sign a guy who could do what LeGarrette Blount does? I don't think so. I don't think any of those guys are there. And speaking of the Patriots and running backs, I just don't get the love for James White. The only thing I can explain is that everyone talks about him. Tom Brady talked about him. Bill Belichick talked about him. So now all the analysts are on him. But the actions tell me that they don't care, because if they did, then Deion Lewis wouldn't have started the playoffs and be the first player in postseason history to have a reception, for a touchdown, a rush, and a return for a touchdown in a game. And he looked great before he got hurt after that again. So you got him, you got Gillislee, you've got Rex Burkhead. They signed those guys, and you're really going to sit here and talk about James White? I mean, like, I don't get that, especially in the context of like, all those guys can all catch the ball well. All of them are quicker. All of them break tackles better. They run harder. And then they still need a LeGarrette Blount type. And it looks like they're just like, okay, well, if no one's going to scoop him up, we will. We know what he's about. We feel comfortable with him. I think there's just some folks who still there's probably some GMs who look at LeGarrette Blount and they just can't get over him punching out the Boise State player.
Right. right? Son Ra's nephew, great nephew. And here's my take on James White, and why, if you're going to do optimism, they signed him to an extension,
Right.
and if LeGarrette Blount doesn't come back, we have to say that we thought when they took Mike Gillislee as a restricted free agent to sign for that offer sheet that we could say, well, LeGarrette Blount won't be back, but in fact, maybe he will. There's 18 touchdowns. How many did he score last year?
Yeah, pretty close.
Freed up, and James White was a player in the Super Bowl that showed that ability to convert. So maybe more of those could end up in James White's category column than Mike Gillislee. But best ball only. I like James White in best ball. I'm not going to be drafting him in typical redrafts. So the LeGarrette Blount transition goes to Detroit. And Detroit did not draft a running back. And they did draft a running back 2 years ago that you loved, Amir Abdullah, and this conversation is going to revolve around him, or maybe around Theo Riddick. Theo Riddick was a low-end running back one in PPR leagues last year. I would argue mostly because Amir Abdullah got hurt in the second game. Dwayne Washington was a little bit of a surprise as a seventh rounder who stuck. But this is a team, one of two teams, Lions and Giants, connected to LeGarrette Blount, but now they have to go back and wonder if it costs us a compensatory pick or takes away. And as I think it was Jeff Risdon. Jeff Risdon's awesome. Not just his draft takes, just his football takes in general. If you're wondering whether is it worth it if we have to give up if we lose a 6th round compensatory pick if we sign LeGarrette Blount, then you don't really want LeGarrette Blount. You don't know what to do with LeGarrette Blount anyway. But what about Amir Abdullah? Because this is a guy still hovering around 6th, 7th, 8th round. He looked pretty dynamic. Obviously, in this offense last year, they showed the ability for an undersized running back to, again, put up low-end running back one numbers. But that was with Riddick getting this role mostly to himself. If they split this role and you have a third back, whether it's Zenner, whether it's Washington, whether it's Blount, none of the above, is this a place to sniff around for profit because they didn't bring in a rookie? Is Abdullah the answer?
I think the entire Detroit offense is that way when you really look at it, ranging from Marvin Jones to Matt Stafford to, of course, Amir Abdullah, because you look at Abdullah, the ability hasn't gone. The two issues in his game have been ball security and staying healthy. So if he can stay healthy this year, which is why his draft stock is low, really, and he can hold on to the ball, Detroit already said pre-draft, he's our starter. They've already declared that. That tells you that they're putting and they didn't do anything after that. So that means they put their faith in Abdullah at this point, and they feel like that this is his chance, and it's his last chance. I mean, this is his last chance, most likely, to be a starter in the league, unless he goes somewhere else as a Shane Vereen type of reserve or backup. Somebody gets hurt and he just blows up, and the team goes, okay, we're going to give him a shot because he looked too good for us not to roll with him further, forward. But it's going to have to be a happenstance situation if he doesn't make good on this. And I think he knows that. I think any player who's been in the league enough and has been in that situation will do that way. So I think he's a good bargain there. And, Dwayne Washington, yes, if he can make the same level of improvement that he showed between his time at Washington to his rookie year, we could also be looking at a guy who may surprise to threaten Abdullah's time there. But, it is a Riddick Abdullah show, and they may say, well, you know what, we like Riddick in certain situations, maybe in 2-minute drills to give Abdullah a break here. And we feel like, or we want to get them both on the field at the same time and use Riddick in the slot or use 2 backfield shotgun type of looks. And Riddick's quickness is fantastic. I think he is arguably he's the most proven and the best receiver from the backfield. I would say that Abdullah has nearly as much talent as Riddick as a receiver. So if he plays well and they feel like he's been so good they can't take him off the field, that would be the reason. But I think that's going to be a bit of a stretch. And then, looking for a power back, it's funny. I think the reason why they may say we don't want LeGarrette Blount just yet is they in the late rounds, or not in the late rounds, as a UDFA, they picked Tion Green out of Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
And when I watched Tion Green play, He's a big, strong dude who can push a pile and break tackles, and he's got just enough burst. I don't think he has the LeGarrette Blount type of footwork and quickness, but he's a good back. He's better than than if I had seen him before the draft, he probably would have been ranked in the RSP higher than a lot of guys who got drafted. And so I really liked I really liked his game from what I saw. And he could sneak in there as well. Because Zach Zenner kept getting hurt. He's been okay, but he hasn't shown up in terms of his workout measurables haven't really shown up on the field as much as, say, Dwayne Washington's has. So, yes, when you look at this team, there are a lot of underrated guys. I mean, Matt Stafford's only had one non-top 10 season out of the past 4 or 5. And he has some consistency things, and everyone looks at him as a gunslinger. But, I was looking at that recently, and I think that he had like 7 games with at least more than 2 touchdowns. And he only had like 2 or 3 games where he had less than 2 touchdowns. And he was playing with a guy who was dinged up in Marvin Jones. He had quad and foot issues, I believe, and he was getting double covered. And who do they have left? Well, Captain Check Down Theo Riddick, Eric Ebron, who still hasn't been consistent, and, Golden Tate, who's a slot receiver, basically, who, had a 90 catch season, but he's going to average around, 8 to 11 yards per catch. So who's stretching the field for them in that situation? And Stafford still, like, his interception rate dropped. He looked good. So I think this team, fully healthy, could really be a bargain place to shop.
Yeah, and they got Ricky Wagner, a really good right tackle. TJ Lang could help the run game if he's healthy. It's funny that you mentioned Green too, because there was a piece in the Free Press, I think, that mentioned that he was a 4-phase special teamer, both return units and coverage units. And
Nice.
he said he wanted to be a franchise special teams player. And that means he's Brandon Bolden and can never really contribute, even though he's on the roster every year and gets some touches. But is in your very deep dynasty leagues where you get down to these level of undrafted free agents, I think give him a $10,000 bonus. I'm going to make a left turn here as we're a little more than halfway through our hour, and there's a really good question, and this actually is relevant to what we're talking about, because we're talking about situations that look like they need some help in the draft, and there's no help coming in the draft. Maybe undrafted free agents, but those are basically free players. And it's that idea of is the person buying the groceries that the chef wants to use in the recipe. And Jordan McNamara, an excellent question. In terms of front offices and coaching staffs, who are the best and least synchronized? And let's try to do this somewhat rapid fire here. And I'll just say it, and you can basically be like a BS detector for what I say and add what you want to say. Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to see if we can get through all 32 teams. All right.
All right. Sounds fun.
Be a fun segment. All right.
Okay.
I'm going to go alphabetically here on each side. Okay. So Baltimore, I think Ozzie and Harbaugh. I mean, this is like in the top 5 in synchronicity.
Lockstep, good or bad, they're there.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Buffalo, until Doug Whaley was fired, I would have said, oh, problemos. But we're going to say this is Sean McDermott top down right now, which is kind of what you want, and like to be seen, but at least the structure is there where there's one chef and he's giving the marching orders to the people buying groceries.
He's Gordon Ramsay, or he's an emperor, or maybe that's the same thing.
Do we even care about Marvin Lewis in the front office in Cincy? I mean, are they aligned in that they're cheap and they just want to keep the ship afloat, and as long as it's afloat, everyone's happy?
Marvin Lewis is like the waitress at the diner where the chef is an absolute mess, but the waitress somehow seems to be the reason you keep going back and keeping the place glued together. He's like the glue that holds that team together. It's amazing.
So what about Cleveland? Is Cleveland basically like a big pantry, but there's not a kitchen yet?
I think that the architects are still trying to figure out the blueprints on that one, and they're still bickering. And meanwhile, the owner's like dealing with his flying biscuits. I don't know. So that's the way I look at it. They're still a little out to lunch, but we saw some good strides made in this draft. So I would say they're getting it together.
Is Denver improved now that Gary Kubiak is not the head coach in this idea? Is Vance Joseph kind of the subordinate in a way that Gary Kubiak wasn't for John Elway, even though he was Elway's backup?
Well, it's interesting because talking to Cecil last week, it sounds like Vance Joseph is very much in personnel decisions. So if that's the case, I'd say they found two guys that get along, and Elway found one of his guys, and now he's okay with it. So maybe it was a personality conflict before.
So I'm not sure what to make of this one, but I did praise the Texans for something we should all take into our lives. Admit when you made a mistake, try to fix the mistake and move on. With Brock Osweiler, is the speed that they did that a sign that there is some sort of alignment that you don't have in the less synchronized organizations?
Yes, I think there is. It's a great sign that they just decided to dump him at the side of the road as quick as possible. And then they seem to be happy about what they picked at quarterback and at running back. And you know, they're another team for good or for bad.
Yeah,
They're doing their things in lockstep.
that's what I was going to say. Is it doesn't always produce best results. Now in Indianapolis, you have Chris Ballard out of that Andy Reid tree, coming out of Kansas City, and we have Chuck Pagano, who might be a lame duck. I don't want to. I mean, I I'm not sure what to make out of Indianapolis yet. Maybe this is a chance for you just to opine on what you thought of Chris Ballard's first draft.
Prove it to me. That's basically what I want to see because I mean, there's some real upside there. I mean, you could look at a guy like Marlon Mack. There was real upside with him, and he's going to get paired with the master craftsman that as I say, all the time, every running back coach wants to show tape of Frank Gore running between the tackles to teach people how to run between the tackles. And Marlon Mack needs a ton of work on how to run between the tackles. But the talent is there, and if he's a quick learner, oh my God, this could be a great pick. But it's a boom bust situation right now.
In Jacksonville, Caldwell is on probation and taking marching orders, commands from Grandpa Coughlin.
Yep, and I think that's basically. I think the drill sergeant has come in there and they're about to clean the barracks out, and I feel pretty good about where they're heading.
In Kansas City, I would say another model organization for Dorsey Reed. And, if Mahomes ends up being everything that Reed can make him into, it could take the next step.
This was a sign of vision and knowing your staff and giving them what they could do best with because a lot of teams would have picked a player other than Mahomes because it would have been a better quick fit rather than picking the guy with tremendous upside who may not seem like he matches on the surface but actually could be the best player for them.
Now, this one, I have to say that I'm not sure. And this could be one that is closer to the bottom in the way that this team has somewhat floundered a bit. And I even think the first round pick is, I'm not sure. The Chargers, Tom Telesco, and what do we make out of what's been going on here with the personnel moves that they've been making? Now they do have Anthony Lynn, a new head coach, and Anthony Lynn was one of the most sought after head coaches. Got a lot of interviews. I think we may look back and see him as someone that rose up the ranks very quickly for a reason. But really, we're rating Tom Telesco here. This is a team that we associate with underachieving. How do we rate the Chargers and the ability to get the recipe and the ingredients lined up?
Well, I feel like that this is a team that it's not so much the recipe and ingredients as if they were driving to the grocery store and they got lost along the way. And I think somebody's been in the back. I think the scouts or like somebody other than Telesco have been sitting there, probably stopped feeding them directions and just because every time they probably talked to him, he started arguing back and they never were getting anywhere. And I think somewhere around last year, that started to change and somehow they were able to figure out how to work with him. And I think this year's a good sign. I love the move to a 4-3 because how the heck, I'm sorry. How do you have Melvin Ingram playing
Right.
3-4 end? That's just redonkulous. The
Yeah.
fact that you're going to have Bosa and Ingram and Atashu as 4-3 ends most likely, or at least two of the three, is such a great switch. So I love that. I think that the Mike Williams thing seemed puzzling on the outside, but they probably lost faith in Keenan Allen. It may be more a Keenan Allen thing than a Tyrell Williams thing. I think they'd probably re-sign Tyrell Williams. But to me, this is more of they've been lost for a little while, but someone's gotten smart to stay quiet so that the bickering will stop and they'll figure out how to manipulate the situation a little bit better. But it's still not healthy, but there's promise that they may find the destination.
Yeah, the clock is ticking with Philip Rivers. Now, this one I don't want to embarrass you because I actually had to look this up, but and it may be indicative of where this team fits on this axis. Can you name the Miami GM?
No, because I still think of Jeff Ireland asking
Right.
about,
It's actually Chris Greer,
Okay.
who's been with the organization since 2000 as a first an area scout, then director of college scouting, and now the general manager. But I think of this as one of those teams where all of the downstream things that happen, all the changes that they make in head coaches, all of the times that Miami has been in the news for the wrong reasons. This feels to me like, and I'm just talking out of other orifices. This feels to me like a one where, again, the owner comes up. You don't want the owner in this picture. The owner might be too much in this picture, or otherwise, when you switch coaches and you switch these things out and you still have these issues, this is probably an organization at the bad end of this axis.
Yeah, the food had the I think the chef is good. The food has issues from lingering issues that they have with setting up their kitchen. Devontae Parker not able to take care of himself. Ryan Tannehill, who just seems to me like he's a very book smart. He's a great example of a book smart, non-intuitive quarterback who looked good towards the end of the season. But he's only looked good against bad teams for the most part. You don't really know what they have at receiver and running back. I mean, the example of why I think the cook is good, he's making the most out of what he's got. And I think he's been able to influence some of the buying of the ingredients, but maybe the storage and food prep, he's got a lot of things to work out. I feel bad for the head chef.
Yeah, Adam Gase, and even the way things came together around Jay Ajayi, but they started out with Ajayi in a four-way running back committee, and then finally figured it out. And actually, the example Jordan McNair had brought up was Leonte Carew, who they gave up a lot of picks to move up and take, and now seem to already
That
close to
that's
being
his
sour.
fault,
Yeah,
and that's actually Gase's fault because Gase said it was my bad. I tried to make him learn all three positions at once right away, and he was slow doing it.
yeah.
So this is a mess.
So the Patriots are obviously the model organization here. If you could, I mean, you can't clone Bill Belichick though, but that,
Fresh laundry.
yeah, yeah, Leal. Jets. Now I'm going to say the Jets almost we have to just put not even rank because they're going to clean the deck, and next year we're going to start over.
Yeah, this is like one of those reality kitchen shows where the guy from New Jersey comes in and basically tells them how bad they are and has to reset everything. And I think that this is like one of those places that you only go to because you're related or you're a longtime guy and you know a lot of people there who show up, but you're always taking a chance with the food or the cleanliness of the restroom.
Sleeper as one of the better organizations with front office and coach alignment. Two old school guys, Reggie McKenzie and Jack Del Rio in Oakland. I think that the way they've turned this organization around with patience, and this is also a vote for continuity because year two, even going into year three, Reggie McKenzie was still kind of a punchline. Nobody's making fun of them, and nobody should make fun of them when it comes to having a vision and executing it.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing about the Jets, one more, just to leave
Yeah,
it on a
sure.
positive note. There's a lot of good food there. They just haven't taken advantage of how to use it. That's what's
Yeah.
sad. Now with the Raiders, I think the Raiders are like that food truck that's about to become a really good restaurant. Like they're about to turn into a brick and mortar place. And at first, everyone made a joke because they were a food truck. But now I think this play it's really building nicely. Even if Derek Carr never becomes anything more than a borderline QB1, QB2. Um, I think the talent that they've put around there is good. They've made some astute picks. They made some astute free agency looks. Love it.
Steelers is another for better or for worse. The marriage goes on, and it's almost like wait long enough, and the pieces start to fall in place. And I'll give a nod here to Keith Butler, the defensive coordinator, who after the bye started to really put some of these young players on the defensive side in positions to succeed. And I almost get the feeling that maybe Mike Tomlin isn't as I don't know that Mike Tomlin would want control of personnel the way that other head coaches want, but it feels like they've got the balance right between Colbert and Tomlin.
Yeah, I think that the Steelers are kind of like that 3.5 star restaurant that's not quite at the level that people want it to be. And then they lost, obviously they lost Dan Rooney, who apparently made calls to pick certain players at certain times. It doesn't happen very often, but it's kind of like a restaurant with a great owner who really understands the industry. And when he steps in, he's usually right. And they lost that kind of go-to compass, and you wonder whether this restaurant is either going to be able to adjust or they're going to start to slide down. And that's, it's interesting to me because they can make some bad food choices, but they still wind up, they have enough personnel there that it's still going well. But if once Ben Roethlisberger leaves, it's going to be very interesting to see what they've done to replace him.
And then we get to Tennessee. I think that we have a dominant and subordinate here with John Robinson and Mike Mularkey. And I think John Robinson is figuring it out as he goes, but all signs pointing in the right direction. And Mike Mularkey seems to know his place and seems to be doing his job well also.
Yeah, this is like your buddies at the pizza joint.
Yeah.
They make something that people would say is not fancy food. It's not anything that you're going to dress up for to go eat. You're not going to see tons of beautiful reviews about them in Zagat, necessarily, or Bon Appetit. But at the same time, what they do is fantastic. You're going to want to eat there all the time, and they know what their ingredients are, and they know how to get the best out of them.
Yeah, no, so this is fascinating. It's via 313, by the way, when you're in Austin, Detroit Style Pizza. And check out coming soon, Nickel City, the old Long Branch Inn, and the Delray Cafe, bringing Detroit Conies.
Who else brings you food analogies at a thing that you and I? This is awesome.
Hungry. We just haven't eaten. I need to have dinner. No, and I hope that this is interesting and fun for everybody. I know this is too much fun for us. I guess so as not to drive this into the ground. As again, this is where Matt. This is where like Cecil leaves and when Gene's not here.
The kids play. Yes.
So we play, but like a couple of organizations. I mean, I really quickly on the NFC, I won't necessarily step through each one, but I think an organization that we continue to watch flounder, and again, ownership comes in, is Washington.
Yeah, and it's interesting because again, they're getting good talent, but they don't seem to. There's just
the Scott McCloughan situation.
Yeah,
I mean, what happened?
We have no idea. So it's they got a great chef, and then they suddenly let him go, and now they're operating with what they got out of it. But now we're wondering how they're going to replace him. They may have gotten by right now, but
they might not even hire a GM. Seattle, obviously, model organization. Tampa seems to be coming along. San Francisco, we're going to wait and see. What do you think
of San Francisco, though? I like what
early returns show. You got to. I mean, just in general, now that we've had an off season and a draft, it sure seems like, and even Denver to an extent with Elway, maybe there is something to the idea of just getting someone who is a football guy. Sorry, pardon the pun.
Yeah. I love it.
To have football instincts at these decisions at the top.
I mean, it's like, if we use the restaurant analogy some more, John Lynch is like a great former head chef who's now owned a restaurant, who's basically owning the restaurant or managing the whole thing. And he knows what he's doing, as opposed to Washington, who has a guy who might as well have been a doctor who decided he wanted to buy a side business for a tax shelter. And he's like completely screwing it up, micromanaging it to death.
There was a time a few years ago that I would have said Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer would be an excellent combo. Is this one where maybe things have happened, suppliers have changed, where they haven't been able to keep up with some of the changes that have been thrown at them? Because it felt like last year, and by the way, this shows the razor thin margins of the NFL, because there were so many games that were really tight last year that they let slip through their fingers, or we'd be talking about this team differently. And obviously you can't anticipate something like what happened to Teddy Bridgewater, but where are you at with the direction of Minnesota at this point?
Good people, bad luck. I feel like it's like the kitchen, like they bought a kitchen and they got good ingredients, and then like the freezer broke, and then the the oven broke, and then like it seemed like every appliance in the kitchen broke at the same time, and they're like having to like adopt. Sam Bradford might as well have been like making food on a hot plate. I
Right.
mean, what he did last year, 70% completion rate, and what he did and all that was such interesting. And Norv Turner quit. I think Norv Turner.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to. I hope I apologize to anyone who can tell me that Norv Turner didn't quit in a hissy fit because he didn't get his way about keeping the offense the same and going down with the ship and like getting his quarterback killed with his long-term, intermediate routes and things like that. I think that's why he left. So I think this team has better personnel, and more in lockstep, but they've had just really horrific luck. It's a rare situation.
Atlanta team we would say is a good model. Tom
Yeah,
Dimitrov.
they brought in, who they bring in over Dimitrov or to work with Dimitrov, the former Patriot Kansas City guy. Didn't they?
I'm drawing a blank.
I'm trying to remember the guy. He's a well-known name, but he came in and
Scott Pioli.
Scott Pioli. Bringing Pioli and Dimitrov together was a very good stroke of like, okay, we're gonna take Dimitrov some of the responsibility away from him and not overwhelm him, but we still think he is important to what we do, and we'll find someone that can work well with him and that he respects, and it worked out very well.
And the Packers obviously streamlined. I mean, been streamlined for a long time. What the Bears I would point to as a team where we might be seeing the fractures now. What do you think?
I think the Bears are the team that what's funny is that every connected draft analyst that I know seems to have a connect with the Bears. Whenever it comes to like character reports, whenever it comes to all those things, it's the Bears that they talk with. So I think we're going to see a lot of people defending the Bears. I'm not going to be one of them. Um, I think that this is a team that used to be very well respected, that has some old school ideas of how things work, and they're getting passed by.
The last one, and again, this is an organization, and in general, we would say the larger the role the owner plays, the worse it is for the organization in general. And we would have pointed towards Dallas through their long winter as one of the worst teams in this fashion. But now, as he's taken a step back and son Steven is doing more, I think Jason Garrett has some say. And then I'll say a name that isn't said very often, Will McClay. And I'll say it because it's one of my family names. My middle name is McClay. My grandfather, Bob McClay. Will McClay has been, and this is a guy that has his pedigree is actually the Dallas Desperados of the Arena League. But I think that even though you have these, it's almost like a triumvirate, like what they were trying to do with the Rams, and it's working. It's a team that actually, if we were to point to a team that had a vision and executed the vision, and who knows if a few things would have went their way in that game against the Packers, I think we are looking at the Cowboys as they figured it out, a model organization.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen lately those Hardee's commercials where like they have the elder Hardee coming back because the son screwed it up. This is like the opposite of that. So it's kind of like it's a good situation, and I think it's, as much as I as a fan I can't stand the Dallas Cowboys, I think it's good for the league that they're a good team, and I think that they've really done some nice work. They deserve a lot of credit for their due diligence, and that Jason Garrett has been able to be a guy that you probably have to give credit to coaches like Garrett, because Garrett's, Bill Parcells, as great of a coach he is, he's a dominant personality. And when you have a dominant personality clashing with another dominant personality, it becomes into an ego pissing match. And I think that that's probably what happened with a lot of these coaches who have dominant personalities. I think Jason Garrett's a guy who's happy to be behind the scenes and let the dominant personality say whatever they're going to say, and then be able to get behind the scenes and get what he wants and figure out how to push the buttons so that the dominant guy can have the headlines, but know that he's steering the ship. And I think that that's what's going on there, is with the guys behind the scenes, they're being able to do that. And Jerry Jones has figured out, hey, I like this winning thing. It's working out well, and I'm getting older, and I don't have to do all this stuff. I don't have to work so hard.
So we just have a few minutes left, and again, since this is like Cecil's away, the mice will play. Brian Comer is asking for some jazz picks, and I know you just who did you give to everybody? Joe Henderson, is that who it was?
Yeah, I gave Joe Henderson in Japan. Jail Blues is a very good song that I would recommend. I've been listening to Ornette Coleman, Change of the Century. If you like free jazz or want an introduction to that where it's not absolutely nuts and will boggle your mind, he's a really great place to start. I would say that's a good one. More modern guys that I would recommend, Christopher Potter, who is just an immaculate improviser that I would recommend highly. And then I would also recommend the trumpet player out of New Orleans.
Herman Ruffins?
No, Chris, or he played with Treme. Let me look it up real quick. I can find it because it's on my playing list like all the time. It is Christian Scott.
Oh, yeah.
Christian Scott, highly recommend. And then probably one of my absolute favorite musicians, who's kind of a John Coltrane devotee, but plays alto and play with Miles. And he also plays some outstanding funk, but he's a diehard, just great jazz musician by the name of Kenny Garrett.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and it's funny too because I was going to tell you this that and of course, anytime people are asking me for jazz picks now, I'm looking at like all the people that collaborated on To Pimp a Butterfly, Kendrick Lamar. So you've got Robert Glasper and Thundercat and Terrace Martin and Kamasi Washington. Kamasi Washington has a new project out that sounds fantastic. Stuff I've been really moving, really intense. I mean, his first album was a 3 LP set called The Epic. And it lived up to that. But I got to tell you, I don't know if I told you this, Matt. Robert Glasper is coming to Atlanta on the 26th. So I hope you get there because I got to see that jam session with Glasper, Terrace Martin, Christian Scott. You mentioned Derek Hodge. Taylor
I will be missing that because I'm going to see Chris Rock.
Oh, well, that's a great excuse. That's a great excuse.
Another good improviser.
But we've talked off the air. Matt and I've talked about like talking all that jazz podcast where we just talked about jazz. And I have to say also, Matt, and this goes on another whole tangent we went on, there was just on the Giles Peterson show in the last month, there was a beautiful rendition of what's it called? Sides of the Three-Sided Dream, the Jaco Pastorius song. And then if you really want to get Matt going, that's off into Brecker and Miami and all kinds of stuff. But we love the jazz. We love the football. We love everybody here. We love our chat room. Really, this is the case of the Three-Sided Dream is actually Rashawn Roland Kirk. My brain is crossing over here as well. We're getting to the end, but it's fun that y'all give us the opportunity to do this. I hope that our little 3 Views of a Secret is the Jaco Pastorius song. Anyway,
both are good recommendations.
Oh yeah, Rashawn Roland Kirk. I think it was who said that he must come back as a C, like he must be reincarnated as like just the note C. He also said we're all at the end of an invisible whip. Now we're really veering off into the podcast that we wanted to. just as we're gonna pull the plug on it, just as we do that. But anyway, it's again, Football Guys is back. Check out everything we've got going on there. Percolating. The smoke is coming out of the smokestacks. Rankings, spotlights, the comments. It's all popping back up. Early bird through May 31st. Get it. Become an Insider Pro. And coming back next week on the couch, Matt and I will be talking about the rookies and their destinations in a lot more depth. Cecil will be back. Gene will be back soon. Happy birthday, Katerina. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. And and again, the birthday concert, Jaco Pastorius. And check out the film. I think it's on Netflix if you don't know the story. The Jimi Hendrix of the bass. Folks, it's a joy to get to continue to come back to this community to share with y'all in football and everything else. You're gracious, you're wonderful, and we keep coming back because you keep coming back, and you keep coming back because you're so classy. Stay classy.